take two. So, welcome to our live Facebook show. Today's title is Speechless in Colorado, and we have a special guest who I'll introduce in a moment. I'm Charmaine Tanner, an advocate, parent, and author of a #1 best-selling book, The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. So we've done some other Facebook Live shows. This is the first one we're using Blue Jeans platform, and this is great because we can actually have our guests appear live on video and with their microphone, and this gives us a chance to have more of an actual conversation. So I'm really excited because we've got a wonderful mom on with us today, and Cindy also is a parent advisor at Peak Parent Center in Colorado, which is Colorado's Parent Training and Information Center. And Cindy and I have been friends for years, and we've also worked together as a family and an advocate when I was helping them advocate for their son Wyatt, who has the best sense of humor. And so when I was thinking of doing a show about Speechless, I thought Cindy would be a perfect guest because most of the experiences that you see on that TV show are things that have actually happened in Cindy and Wyatt's life too. So with that, we'll introduce Cindy here. And Cindy, what would you like to tell us? I know you were so excited when the Speechless TV show was announced. And so what do you think now that there's been a few episodes of it?
I've been really impressed with how accurate everything is. My son Evan said he thought somebody was spying on us to write the show. And then he said it was the most realistic thing he'd ever seen on TV. So yeah, it's amazing how many things are parallel to what we're doing and what we've seen happen over the years.
I bet, I know. And I think one of the things that I was really happy about was that the actor that they picked for JJ is actually a person with a disability versus somebody playing that role. So to me, that makes it that much more authentic.
Yeah, I think so too.
Go
And
ahead.
At first I was a little bothered that people were speaking for him and reading off his device. But now I think Wyatt would really love that if people would have to say what he typed or what he said. I think I liked the little bippity boppity boo scene. I was like, Wyatt would have really gotten a kick out of that if he could make people say what he wanted them to say. So I would see how that could turn into a very big deal.
And that's the thing that I love about you too is the phrases and the language that you put on Wyatt's communication device. I mean, it's real, what kids would actually say. It's not like this stilted kind of, standard, conversation text or something. And probably because Wyatt has a twin and he has an older sister, so what kids are saying. But can you give some examples of some of the, I don't know, just the real language that you put on Wyatt's communication device?
I'm trying to think what my kids usually help me decide what we're going to add when we do any updating. He also has a great speech therapist who gets his sense of humor, so she does great wording things different ways. The last thing we put on there is, I think we have that's epic, that's sick, all the things they say. And then he spells more, so he can use word prediction and say whatever he wants now. So that gets a little scary. So luckily he hasn't realized he could spell bad words yet because he really likes bad words. So.
And those are the ones that he'll spell perfectly,
Mm-hmm.
I know. So what have been some things, like you mentioned a couple things, but what have been some other things that have happened on Speechless, and it's like you can just so relate to that?
Oh, the one scene I really liked from the first episode was when they took JJ into the class and the class cheered and acted like he wasn't just a student, he was super special to be there, and they were so happy he was there. And that's kind of been an argument I've had through the years with school when they bring Wyatt in after the class starts. And then he feels like he's on display and feels like he should make everybody laugh and feels like he shouldn't do what everybody else is doing, that he should be special. So I thought that was neat that they over dramatized that issue, because I think our kids miss those natural transitions a lot, and it sets them up for misbehavior because they don't feel like they have to act like everybody else, or that they're not just another student in the class, that they're special.
Right, right. And so, the other thing I think I've sometimes when I'm watching Speechless as an advocate, I look at things and I think, oh, just like for instance, when you see the aide coming to their house to pick up JJ and doing things at the house, and then part of me is like, yeah, but that wouldn't really happen. So why do they show that on that TV show? It's going to set parents up for the expectation that um, students do get transportation like that, or that the aide would actually be there in the morning at the household to help. So part of me is like, Charmaine, you should just take this as a comedy and just experience the comedy. And part of me is like, oh no, this isn't right or something. I don't. Do you find yourself thinking that?
That's what I thought when that happened. It took me a while to realize what they were doing and that she went home with them. We do have nursing now, and the nurses come and ride the bus with Wyatt. They also work here when school's out. It's great because they see how we do things at home, and that carries over in school. So it's been a great thing. It would be great if it worked that way with the aides, but
Right.
they don't get to see what happens in your house. It would be great if they did, if they spent a whole day and saw how we interacted with them and how everything's not as hard as you make it sometimes.
Right. Right. So what are some of the funny or ridiculous things that have happened in school with Wyatt? I mean, if you can share the story about the feeding tube in science class.
Yeah, so Wyatt has a pump that does his feeding. His feeding takes about an hour each time. So we don't stop everything and feed him. We just hook him up. He sits with us at dinner. It might still be going, and then he goes and does his other things. So at school, that's what they do. They hook him up. He goes to class. But they said he had to be unhooked during science class because there's no eating or drinking in science. So it took a while to convince them this is a little different. He can't eat in 15 minutes like all the other kids. So he has to still eat. And then they said they couldn't unhook him in there. They had to take him in the hall. So that meant that the nurse had to get up, take him from the back of the class, take him out in the hall, unhook him, which takes 2 seconds, and go back. And the other part to that story that I don't think I told you before was the teacher said, we're worried about his modesty because we have to lift up his shirt a little to unhook him. And I said, he's a boy. I think he's good. And then after that, Wyatt started lifting his shirt up all the time. So we're like, are you worried about they're worried about your modesty, Wyatt. You probably should keep your shirt down. And now he thinks it's funny to lift up his shirt because they're worried about his modesty.
And that's and that's the thing. It's like on a way, I guess on one level, to me, that's like a really funny story. On another level, it's like, you know, how can school people say things like that and like actually believe that that's appropriate for them to say that a kid can't be fed during science class because of the class rule? So as a parent, I don't know, like, how do you go back and forth between, getting frustrated and this is another time you have to advocate versus like, this is so ridiculous, I'm just going to laugh about it.
That one took a little while to address, surprisingly. You would think after you draw it to their attention, they would say, well, you're right, it is a completely different situation. But it took a few conversations to get them to finally see that they needed to do it. And so I have one nurse who does it in science class. The other nurse doesn't want to feed him in science class, and he leaves early that day, so I just didn't push that.
Right.
So I've I've kind of learned to let some things go. But that one I wasn't going to let go when he's there all day and he's going to be in the whole class. And I don't want him pulled out. I want there to be a reason he's pulled in the hall, because that's a transition. Then you're expecting behavior. He's leaving and then he's got to come back. And so he wants everybody to pay attention to him when he enters a room. So then you're just setting up behavior issues. So they just don't see how those things single him out and how they set up a behavior situation to happen.
Right.
Because the more you treat him like other students, the better outcome you're going to have behaviorally.
Right. Right. So what about like I don't know if it was the last show of Speechless or the one before that, but and it might have been the last one where the aide let JJ drive the van. So my guess is Wyatt would love to have that power and control to drive a vehicle. What do you think?
Oh, he would love to control anything he could control, I'm sure. So, yeah, he has a power chair. He hasn't gotten great with that yet, so we'll see. But he likes that control. He likes being able to do anything on his own.
Right.
But finding
And
a way to make that work is hard.
say that again.
Finding a way to make that work is hard, to give him some control and some independence.
Right. And that's the thing that I think a lot of school people don't realize is how important that is. And they look at that as inappropriate behavior when our kids are probably just communicating that they want to have more choices and they do want to have that independence. And also, I think the other part that our kids want a lot of times is to be on the end of giving help instead of always receiving that help and support. And I don't know if you see that with Wyatt too.
I mean, he thinks it's his job to make everybody laugh. So I've seen when everybody's tense, that's when he usually tries to come up with something funny to say or to so I think that's something he feels like he has the power to do, to make somebody feel better or to make them laugh. Um, he likes, I mean, I don't know any 14-year-old boy that would want to be attached to an adult all day. So he has a
Right.
lot of adults around him. So I think like he can read on his iPad now, and you
Yeah.
just set him up and he'll ask to go in his room and read alone. And we had, I think it was at school last year or the year before, they sent him a note that an aide was reading to him every day. And I thought, what 13-year-old boy wants to sit with a grown woman reading a book to him? I mean, it
Right.
sounds nice and it sounds more personal, but he'd rather you leave him alone, set him up, and he can read by himself. That's what that's what his brother would want to do. He wouldn't want to sit and have me read a book to him.
Right.
And
Right.
so, and that's a lot easier, but they felt like that was more personal. But I think I try to look at it as he's a teenage boy. What does he want? You know, what would my other son want to do? Would he want to sit with an adult all day? If he has a chance to be away from an adult for a little while, we should give him that chance.
Yeah. And I think in the Speechless show, it's nice because the aide that works with JJ, seems to be that cool guy. And, they kind of have this back and forth banter that they do. But unfortunately, not all aides or parents that work in the school have that same personality. So, have you seen the difference that it makes with who is actually supporting Wyatt when he's in the class?
I think so because Wyatt will communicate with his device, but he also communicates with a yes no response with his eyes. And when he really has not connected with somebody, that response is not as clear. And I think he does that on purpose. So if he doesn't want to talk to you, he won't answer, or he'll give you an answer that you can't really decipher. So it makes a difference with getting the knowledge out of him, knowing what he's learning. If it's somebody that's hovering and in his space and he doesn't want to deal with them anymore, then he just won't answer. But if it's like he has a male nurse that he loves, he communicates with him all day. It's very rare that he'll refuse to answer him. But
Right.
then he has a staff person at school that he just refuses to answer at all. So it just depends and I think it's more people who don't give him space, don't talk to him like the age he is. Like he was supposed to write a paper, and they asked me that when I was picking him up one day if I would ask him what he wanted to write his paper on. And they said it needs to be a challenge he feels like he faces. We thought maybe a surgery or having to use a talker. So they said, so you ask him which one he wants to do. Well, he was right there. And I said, Wyatt, what do you want to write your paper on? Do you want to write it on how hard it is when you have to have surgery, or how hard it is because you have to use a talker, or something else? And then he said he wanted to write it on the talker. So I just turned to him and said he wants to write it on the talker. Like, we just made that a lot harder than it needed to be.
Right. I
So,
know. It's the old thing of like, do you treat every person with a disability as if they're deaf, and you talk to the person they're with, or you talk louder. And I don't know, it's just frustrating because you would think that the people that work in the schools would, I don't know, it just seems like that should be common sense, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be.
yeah.
So what are I think for Dylan, one of the things that he almost was proud of is when he would get in trouble at school, because to him that meant that he was like, any other kid. So so what could you share with Wyatt, a story about Wyatt and maybe how he likes to get in trouble or get other people in trouble?
Well, he likes to say random things. I remember there was a time he and Evan were in the same classroom, and Evan came home and he said that Wyatt said it was boring and that the whole class started laughing. And I said, well, you're not supposed to laugh when he does things like that. You're supposed to just pretend he didn't say it. And he goes, well, to be totally fair, it was very boring. So he loves to get the other kids to interact with them. So he will talk out of turn sometimes, and he will. I've been in class where like they're numbering kids off and they'll skip him. And then when they get to the end, they'll look at the para and say, you can just join this group. And those things, he'll start acting out. But since we have the nurse that's with them all day, he sees the whole day. So he'll tell them what he thinks just upset him. So they can correct it right then, and then we don't have a whole day. So I think we miss the value of somebody who sees them all day long. Because especially in middle school where they're changing classes and you don't know what happened in the previous class and what carried over because he has such a delay in communication. So it's really nice. I think a lot of things have been de-escalated because the nurse has seen right away, you changed his schedule. He's not used to doing that at this time. And then they can go back and correct or explain and really set out these little fires before it turns into a whole full-blown meltdown.
Right. And I think that's probably an excellent point that I think maybe even parents don't think about, because so many times when I'm advocating in IEP meetings with families, the school will talk about trying to change paras and not have that one person all the time with their child, and the advantages of your child being able to work with other people. But I think that point that you made, as far as, but it's nice to have that consistency so they actually get to, one, get to know the child more, and two, that they do know what just happened earlier in the school day, in the morning or in the afternoon.
Yeah, and
So
it's
have, so go ahead.
yeah, and Wyatt, you can ward off a lot of things just by talking. So if you're talking to him and telling him what's happening, telling him why things change, but if you just change something, then so it's nice to have somebody extra there that can say, "Oh, you didn't tell him that was changing today," or "We didn't tell him that was happening," or if something happens all of a sudden, they can tell him. So as much as I hate having adults with him all the time, I hate that he has to have that, but it still helps him. And then the nurse is really good at staying back, which a lot of paras, hover and stay right, so close, and they become their best friend instead of letting them make friends in the class. I think we have a really good nurse that knows to stay back, and he doesn't interfere in that, but he jumps in when he needs to. And I think the school staff has learned to value his opinion, where sometimes they don't like an extra person in there. But it's
And
really, I never thought about the benefit of him being there all day and being able to tell me the little things too that the school wouldn't think of telling me that make everything make sense.
right, right. Huh. So how long has the nurse been with him? Is this something new this year, or you've been doing it a couple years, or?
About 2 years.
And so the other thing I think that would be interesting, is to maybe share with people how Wyatt accesses his talker, um, with the scanning that he does. So, if there'd be a way that you could explain that, I think that would be interesting for people to hear.
Okay. Well, Wyatt does auditory scanning. So we actually hang his device on the back of his chair. He doesn't like to see it.
Uh,
I don't know if he thinks somebody's messing with it or it just messes him up because he has such delay between vision and processing. So he listens to choices and then he clicks into different areas. And so you'll hear it scanning. So you hear a light voice and then he hits a head switch to go where he wants to go. And then when he gets to the final option, what he's choosing, it'll speak out. So when he's doing word prediction, I don't even know how he does it, but he has to remember what he's spelling, what letter he's on, what letter he's doing next, where that letter is, and he can't see it. So he has to remember what he was doing. So he'll sometimes have random letters on there and he'll just give up, go out, come back, do it again. So, and he's really worked on building sentences. So he knows to go to one page and grab something and then go to another page. And Evan wrote a paper and my daughter was editing it and she said, "You didn't use any punctuation. You have to use punctuation." Well, then Wyatt started using punctuation with everything to tell us he knew how to use punctuation when Evan didn't. So
Well,
sometimes it takes a little while to get the humor, what he's trying to do.
yeah, and so that is like such incredible, like auditory memory kind of stuff. It blows me away that he can remember, like you said, in certain pages that he uses a lot. I'm sure that he's gets to that pretty quickly now. But so the word prediction, does that work like, so if he scans and stops on certain letters, and then will the voice come up and give him like a choice of words that he can use?
Yeah, it does. So it has where he does row column scanning. So it'll tell him you have these letters on this row. It'll do the letters real fast. And then if he clicks on that row, he'll go and get the letter he wants. And then word prediction comes up at the top and he has to scan that bar to go into the word choices.
Huh.
And then but there are times he says things that I'll take a picture of his screen and send it to the speech therapist. And like, I don't even know how he said that. Like he had to go to like 5 different pages and then put a period at the end where it read the whole thing. So
Huh.
yeah, it's really, really crazy what he comes up with.
And that just, I mean, that takes a lot of cognitive ability too. And so I don't know if you want to speak to, what I think is so sad so many times is when people first meet somebody with a physical disability, there's often that judgment that cognitively that there's also, developmental delays, which doesn't necessarily hold true. So I don't know. It's like I think sometimes how do parents convince the school that they can have higher expectations for their child? So what have you had to do as a parent and an advocate for Wyatt to help schools, increase their expectations for him?
Well, I think it's been hard with him because if somebody goes in with low expectations, that's what he gives them. So it's
Mm,
like a game with him. If you're going to talk to him like he's 3, he's going to act 3. So I always tell everybody, talk to him like he's the age he is because he doesn't give second chances very easy. So he makes a first impression with someone and you'll see him change how he acts in front of them. So then
mm,
you're trying to convince people he knows how to do things. He does not like special education rooms. He just shuts down in those. He doesn't do anything. I think there's just too much going on at one time. And he likes to learn. He likes to learn the grade level curriculum. He likes to show you what he learned. He likes to read age appropriate books. Those are the things he likes. So he's going to shut down if he's in a room where they're doing lower level. We had a time in elementary school where they said he wasn't doing anything. He refused to do anything. Well, he was in the special education room almost all day. So then one day I said, well, if you're going to keep acting like you can't do anything, then you could just stay in that room all day. I can't do anything if you can't show them what you could do. And then the note came home that day that he did everything they asked him to do because he knew that was his ticket out of that room. Like you have to show people what you do. So a lot of it has been convincing him that it's in his best interest to show people what he can do. So yeah, we've just had to push, and I hate that he missed so much time in elementary school and gen ed because I think he would have built on the knowledge, and I think he's having to go back and learn some things. And it's probably why he might be a little bit further behind. Had a friend whose son used a device, but he was not included in the very beginning, and they wanted him to write in full sentences. Well, he'd never learned how to write in full sentences. So he had missed that basic knowledge because it took so long to prove that he should be with the general education students. So I think we lose sight that they learn a lot in those first few years. And if we're not letting them keep up with their friends and then they get a device and they're able to get the knowledge out, then we've missed all that education.
Right, because I remember the day that I observed him when he was in elementary school, and I think it was a para. I don't think it was a teacher, but she was working with him one-on-one in just this real small room, and she was reading this story about the monkeys going to the mall to go shopping, and I was thinking, how ridiculous is this for Wyatt? I mean, I can't remember exactly how old he was, but totally not appropriate for a young guy to be listening to this story about the monkeys going to the mall to go shopping. And I think the person reading the story just thought, oh well, this will be an engaging story and won't this be nice to read? And it was like, are you kidding me? Why would you do this?
Yeah, he would definitely prefer to read Harry Potter over what people would pick to read to him.
Right, right. And I think the other point too is that it's so sad that our kids have to prove that they have that right to belong. And for Dylan, I mean, with Down syndrome, cognitively, he's going to be, at a different level than the other students, but he learns so much by being in general ed classes. So, it's just frustrating when you hear staff want kids to be at a certain level before they give them that right to be in there with their peers. And hopefully that's lessening in our schools, but I don't know. As an advocate that goes to IEP meetings all the time, I just continually see that they're not ready yet kind of mentality.
Yeah, and then speechless when she said we have a one-on-one, no more special ed. It's like if it was only that easy, that was your if we could find the ticket out of there, we would make it happen.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, so I'm sure you can relate to JJ's mom as far as the amount of advocacy that she's had to do for JJ.
Yes, definitely. And then how she's known at all the schools and how they prepare people. I feel like our teacher gets prepared every year, I'm sure. I'm sure they're prepared for us to move to high school next year. So they're ready. And then I had another parent say they don't focus on they don't focus on academics in high school. They look at life skills. And I said, well, that won't work for Wyatt, so we'll have to find what works. Well, that's not what they do there. Like, well, that might not be what they do for people who don't go in and try to individualize the program, but we're going to go in because Wyatt's never going to do laundry. He's never going to cook, but he can go in and learn science and he can learn English and he can learn, and then he can show you what he learned and he can participate in school. So we'll see how that one goes.
I know. And that's, where sometimes I think, I have this mantra that reading is a life skill, because so many times, like you said, I think especially in middle school and more so in high school, kids that have more significant needs than, they spend time folding towels for their cafeteria or counting plastic coins or, a bunch of things that aren't very relevant to their life. So unfortunately, I think it's that case by case where it just takes persistence on the parents' part, to make sure that their kids get the individualized education that they deserve. Um, so yeah, I think the nice thing about high school and middle school too is that there's more elective classes. So then Wyatt will be able to choose some things. So so what would be some areas besides like science? What do you think would be some electives that he'd like to experiment with?
Well, we've had a harder time with electives than I thought. Like they put him in band. He's in PE and band now, and he does like band, but lately all so he gets a timeout. I want to think of a different word for that when we go to high school, but he just gets pulled out in the hall and he regroups and then he goes back in, and it's worked really well. Um, but his timeouts lately have been his 1 hour in special ed and band. So
Huh,
it's the thing I think would be easy for him, but I don't think he's so really the academics really draw him in more.
huh,
So
oh,
I mean, you
cool.
could turn on an educational video, he's totally happy. So he just wants to learn. And he would read all day if you let him.
Huh,
So he'll read all day. So that seems to be what he gravitates to. So I think in band he knows he's participating, but not really. And he sees that they're actually playing the instruments, and he plays some on his iPad, I think, but he's not playing the way they're playing. And then special ed, I think he just wants to be back in class.
huh, right, huh.
So
So
yeah, so
that's
he's different than a lot of kids.
so. So what have you found as good ways for Wyatt to be able to show what he's learned? Because I think that's the other kind of roadblock sometimes for our kids is to be able to show people what they already know and what they've learned.
He we've struggled with people wanting to put his answers on his communication device. And so we do partner assisted scanning where we give him the choices and he answers with his yes response. So that's the best way. You just have a conversation about what he just learned, or you do fill in the blank questions, or if you're writing a story, you leave blanks and give him choices, and then you always have the choice of something else. So like they wanted to write something on a famous person or put together a project. So then I was like, well, this could be all day deciding who he wants, because I'd name off three people and then I'd say someone else. So luckily, about the third someone else, we finally figured out who he wanted to write the paper on. But we could have gone all day. He could have said someone else. He could have had somebody in his mind, but getting that one person out is going to be very hard. So it's nice that he can spell some now. So I would hope he'd go on his talker and help me out. So he always has his talker if he chooses to use that for answering, but we don't want that to be his first, what everybody depends on,
Huh,
because then he might not have it in there.
right,
So
right, right. So, and I know he was, in elementary school when he, I think Gina helped, figure out a way that was consistent for him to be able to show yes and no, responses to people. So, do you want to say, and each kid is different, but for Wyatt, do you want to explain how he shows people yes or no?
we were really people at school were coming up with different ways he could do it. He knew how to click his tongue. That's how he told the horse to go when he was horseback riding. So they thought he could make that a yes. So I did talk to my friend and I said, this is what they want to do. And she said, why don't you go with the more socially acceptable thing first and then work your way down? So if he can track, if he has enough vision to track, we could do yes and then shake his head for no. So we used a rain stick, which was his favorite thing at the time. And we would say yes, and he would track it. And it took a whole summer. And then we had to respond every time he did that. And then we did have a shaking his head for no. That's pretty much turned into either looking down or not responding yes, kind of what that's morphed into. But it
Hmm,
took a lot. We would ask him questions. We knew the answer was yes, and then we would track, move the rain stick, and he would track. And then it took a long time to get that motion down. And he did learn to do that right at the same time he started using his first device. So he actually refused to use the device at first because he thought everybody should just ask him yes or no for everything. So it was a little bit of a battle to get him to move along to something else.
So, does Wyatt watch Speechless with you?
We've been taping it because usually he's done for the day when it comes on because it's a school day. But he's watched the tape episodes. So it depends on what mood he's in if he'll watch it or not. He really liked the first episode.
Huh. Yeah, I could see him cheering JJ on for different things, especially when JJ was maybe being a little, you know, a little naughty or something. But um, I don't know. I was just curious, like if Wyatt's ever said anything as far as what his response is, or do you see
He
him
just
ever taking a dramatic role for something?
he just laughs at the funny parts. I don't know that he gets the big picture of it. I think he thinks that's just everyday life, probably, because that's everyday life for us. So
Right,
I'm sure he sees some parallels to how his brother and sister act and how the brother and sister act on there.
right, right. And um, so we have a few minutes left. So what would be some tips that you could give parents um, when they're advocating for their child who might not have that verbal communication, but you know, basically needs a way to communicate with others? What would be some tips that you could give other parents?
Definitely to look at the assistive technology, that there's so much technology out there, and not to wait until you think your kid's ready for it, but to introduce it and then see what they do. There are some kids that you give them a device and they just take off. It's been in there the whole time and they had no way to get it out. Wyatt was not one of those kids. Wyatt was one of those kids that we had to send him to camp where they all use devices, and we had to really put funny things on there to get him to use. So I think it's just not giving him some a yes no button and stopping there, but give them a device and see what they do. So don't start low and then wait to build up. Try starting high and then going back down.
Huh. Yeah, I think that's great because it's just I'm still kind of amazed sometimes when I advocate for families and they have a student that's maybe in upper elementary and they still don't have a device that is really appropriate for them. And it's like, I can't imagine living your life for so many years and not being able to communicate with others, and how frustrating. And yeah, they're going to have behaviors because that's the only way they have of showing, what they're feeling.
Yeah, and definitely not waiting for the school to come up with something. If you don't think that's moving along, then to look for somebody outside of the school where you can get some different input. So not just relying on one source of input, because speech therapy and the technology, there's so much out there, nobody can keep up on all of it, and you're going to hear a different view from everybody. It's not going to be the same view, but to hear all the views and then your kid and then what you think they'd really gravitate to, and then making sure they have the language that they would actually use, not language that's manufactured. But even if you have talked to other kids their age or just listen to kids talk, you'll come up with things to put in.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that's a talent that you and your other kids have, as far as being able to know the right things to put on Wyatt's device. And um, so I want to thank you for being here. I know Wyatt is, probably being patiently waiting for some other attention, and I appreciate you carving out this time on your Sunday, because I know as a single mom, there's lots to be doing, especially the day before a big holiday, right? So maybe that's what we'll ask. What is Wyatt going to dress up for Halloween?
Wyatt does not like Halloween.
Uh,
We've tried. He doesn't like masks. He doesn't like hats. He doesn't eat candy. He does not see the point in Halloween at all. We've tried to get him to like Halloween. He does kind of like the going to the door and seeing what the kids are wearing, but
right,
he's not a night person because he starts his day at about 4 a.m. So he's done by the time it's dark. He doesn't want to deal with people anymore. So yeah, that's one holiday we haven't. He does enjoy Christmas and he definitely enjoyed his birthday, but
right,
Halloween's not one of his favorites. The other kids enjoy it.
right. Well, I think it's been so fun, and I'm glad that technology seemed to be with us today, and we didn't have any glitches other than me forgetting to turn my mic on at the beginning, right? Um, but I think this has been really helpful because as a parent, you have done such an excellent job being not only that kind, loving mom to your three kids, but also knowing that you had to step out and also be that assertive advocate for Wyatt. So your experiences are things that new parents starting this journey can really learn from. And I'm sure as a parent advisor at Peak Parent Center that you're going to bring such experience and knowledge that you're just going to continue to help lots of other families.
Thank you. I hope so.
You will. So I want to thank everybody who joined us live today and remind you if you missed part of the show that this will be on my Facebook page. So if you like the page Visions and Voices Together on Facebook, you'll be able to go back and make comments or ask questions, and Cindy and I can check the page periodically and respond to your questions. But I would encourage you to like Visions and Voices Together, and that way you can keep up with our Facebook Live shows. We have, I'm right now working with the founder of the Angel Sense GPS tracking device, and he's agreed to come on to our Facebook Live show. So if you've heard about that, as far as it's a tracking device and also has some audio capabilities, he'll be joining us from Israel. So we'll have to figure out a time where that works. So neither one of us are up in the middle of the night, but he will be our next guest on our Art of Advocacy live show. So thanks, Cindy, for being here, and we shall be in touch with everybody. Take care.